Ladies and gentlemen, I am SidAlpha. Now, the concept of console exclusives has always been a bit of a sore point for many gamers and has long been held up as an example of anti-consumer practices and the number one end-all and be-all retention to relevance the gaming consoles of the world can maintain. Now, console or paid exclusives are where a platform manufacturer pays a game developer somewhere between 1 and 500 buttloads of money to either the game developer or the publisher to have a game only released for their specific device. Now, this creates an artificial need that drives the console market and is about as blatantly anti-consumer as a digital homicide asset flip. But is there a time when exclusives are a good thing? Now, my first reaction would be no, absolutely not. There's never an instance where exclusives are good for the consumer, but what if I was wrong? Now, I'm talking, of course, about the game exclusives that have been getting produced for the Oculus Rift VR gear, and beings the great and mighty Gaben hath done shone his light upon thee with a statement about VR exclusives. I thought it was worth discussing. Now, Gabe Newell's email was released in response to Oculus VR's offering, quote-unquote, a shit ton of money to Crow Team to help develop their game Serious Sam VR The Last Hope. Now, they declined the offer, stating that they hate exclusives as much as we do, and even though this was offered for a timed exclusive, the development team, I feel, was right to decline the offer, and I applaud them for their decision. And in relation to this, Gabe Newell sent the following via email. We don't think exclusives are a good idea for consumers or developers. There's a separate issue, which is risk. On any given project, you need to think about how much risk to take on. There are a lot of different forms of risk: financial risk, design risk, schedule risk, organizational risk, IP risk, etc. A lot of the interesting VR work is being done by new developers. That is a triple risk whammy: a new developer creating new game mechanics on a new platform. We're in a much better position to absorb financial risk than a new VR developer, so we're happy to offset that, giving developers development funds, essentially prepaid Steam revenue. However, there are no strings attached to those funds. They can develop for the Rift or PlayStation VR or whatever the developer thinks are the right target VR systems. Our hope is that providing that funding, that developers will be less likely to take on deals that require them to be exclusive. Makes sense? Now, at face value, this sounds like a good idea. Let Steam, the mega company, absorb the risk, and the funding will be basically a loan. And at the same time, it will avoid hardware exclusives and will help benefit the new VR genre as a whole, right? Well, maybe not quite as much as you think. But let's not jump straight into the conclusion. Let's take a look at things a little bit first. Now, for the sake of argument, let's assume that the hardware exclusives aren't all bad. What would make them a good thing? Locking a game to a specific piece of hardware limits the customer base and stifles competition, as it forces anyone who wants to play those games to have to purchase that hardware. That, by its very definition, is anti-consumer. However, we have to look at things from a slightly different perspective. Now, VR technology is exceptionally new, and any game developers making games for the VR market are, like Gabe Newell said as well, they're taking a risk, as there's no telling how long it will be or even if VR will become mainstream enough to make it profitable enough to produce titles on that platform. Now, pure hardware or platform exclusives are always going to be ultimately anti-consumer, and I doubt my mind will ever change on that. But what about timed exclusives? Where the hardware platform, like Oculus, pays you a huge sum of money to help offset the risk of developing on VR, and they're looking for a timed exclusive, not a full exclusive. What then? And it severely limits the risk to the games developers, which allows a greater number of them to bring their games to VR and expand the market, helping to make VR more mainstream. And I feel that the VR industry is still exceptionally new, and that isn't necessarily entirely a bad thing, and it will help a fledgling industry for not only the Oculus, but the Vive as well, and any other VR companies that will come after. Now, in return for this, Oculus, of course, will have their timed exclusive to where, it benefits their device in the short term, but a timed exclusive will expire and the game will come out for the other devices as well. So it is it's not wholly anti-consumer in that instance, only partially. But then what about Gabe Newell's recommendation? Let's take a look at that one a little bit more closely. We're happy to offset that, giving developers development funds, essentially prepaid Steam revenue. However, there are no strings attached to those funds. They can develop for the Rift or the PlayStation VR or whatever the developer thinks are the right target VR systems. Okay. Now, yes, with this, they're helping to avoid hardware exclusivity, which is not a bad thing. But you have to remember, they aren't doing this out of the goodness of their own hearts. Excuse me. This is a loan, not a payment. So the benefit and risk offset for the game's developers aren't lessened nearly as much as if they accept a deal for a timed exclusive. They're still taking a risk there. They are. Because they have to pay Valve back. Whereas if they take the timed exclusive, that's income already. Now, this plan that Gaben puts out serves to put more money into Valve's pockets and make Steam come across like a big hero when they're simply making it a marketing ploy. Now, realistically, to be honest, I feel that the VR market, until it gets its feet under it, becomes established, paying the developers for timed exclusives will ultimately be a bigger benefit than taking a loan from Valve ever will be. Now, of course, there will always be games developers that are making their games for VR already and will turn down the offer like Crow Team did. And those developers gain a great deal of respect in my eyes for not being short-sighted and not accepting a deal when they don't need to. They could have made a quick buck, but opted for honesty and integrity. However, there are those out there who might be on the fence about whether to bring their games to VR or not, as they might feel that the risk is too great, and that funding would definitely help offset that and will ultimately bring more games to the VR arena. Granted, of course, with the timed exclusives, it will artificially bolster the Oculus's stable of games first, but those exclusives will expire, and they'll, just like they do on console timed exclusives, and they'll come out for the Vive and the others as well. But you have to remember, my agreeing that this timed exclusivity for the VR market is under the caveat that it's only for timed exclusives and only for at this point in time. Now, once VR is established and that risk is gone, then timed exclusives will be delegated back to the role of being greedy and anti-consumerist in nature. So sorry everyone, I'm afraid I cannot see the light of Gaben on this one, but if you have arguments to one side or the other, please let me know in the comments, and if we get enough comments or someone brings up a point I hadn't considered, then we might do a follow-up video on this and talk about it further if it's something that might interest you guys. But in the meantime, once again, ladies and gentlemen, I am SidAlpha, and I will see you next time. Hi there, boys and girls, thanks for checking my video out. If you liked what you saw, don't forget to hit that like button and maybe even that subscribe button. Trust me, it works really good. Don't forget to share with your friends, and if you're interested in following me on Twitter and Facebook, the links for that are in the description down below. I also have a Patreon if you're interested in helping to support the growth of my channel, and the link for that is down below as well. And once again, thanks for watching and supporting my channel, guys. I really appreciate it.